You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG. Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games, where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss Downtime. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Matt, and with me, as always, is my good friend and GM colleague, Jody.
Hey,
Jody,
hey.
How you doing?
Dude, I love some downtime. Kicking the feet up, nice warm cup of tea or other delicious beverage of your choice. Get a good book, flip through those pages, ponder the universe, contemplate my navel, all that stuff. I'm here for it. I'm excited about downtime. I love it. Whereas in contrast, my friend...
I don't like downtime. Downtime's terrible. Always work. Nose to the grindstone. Never any downtime.
We are speaking of course, of the real life, whereas that's not what we're here for. Real life is terrible. Let's talk about a game.
Indeed, Jody. So today's episode does indeed focus on downtime. And Jody, you're going to take us to the table with some examples of downtime. What do you got?
All right. So actually, this episode comes from Game Master Shame over on Discord. Great handle, by the way. We can all relate. And he says, if you haven't covered it on an episode yet, carousing and downtime would be cool to hear about. I just did a carousing focused session with my table and they enjoyed it. Looking for more ways to make sure everybody has some spotlight time while we keep up the pacing. So this was right in our wheelhouse. Matt and I already had this in the queue as something we wanted to talk about. So here we are to do just that. Now, in my own experience, this made me hearken back to a specific event where when I was running one of my Salt Marsh kind of rotating micro campaign sessions, we had a session where in the middle, there was about 2 weeks of time that needed to pass. And I loosely just laid that out and said, let's do some downtime. And the party said, okay. And people started doing things. And I looked across and noticed one of my players named Matt was looking perplexed and was a little lost in the sauce because people were doing all sorts of things, traveling to other nearby villages and meeting people at taverns and having individual little conversations. And what was that time? What was I doing? Where were they? How long was this? And it was really ambiguous in terms of what was going on. Now, Shadowdark has some very specific rules about how to handle downtime and gives you options for specifically carousing and learning, and they're kind of loose because it's Shadowdark. So what we're going to do is take a little time to unpack downtime, both in Shadowdark's rules light system and some other systems maybe, and talk about how some other folks deal with it. So hopefully we'll be able to give you something useful as always, and at least some food for thought.
All right, Jody, let's gather around the fire and talk about downtime. And what better way to frame the conversation than gathering around the fire, which is something that could potentially happen during maybe some downtime. And what I think you laid out perfectly was that we should start with how Shadowdark approaches downtime, and then maybe if the conversation takes us there, then start thinking about maybe some other systems and also how we do it, because I think we've made some interesting and maybe, I don't think controversial, but changes that not everybody's going to necessarily be stoked about. So, Jody, why don't you kind of take us through, if you would, just the basics of how Shadowdark handles downtime, and then we can go from there.
It's really pretty cut and dry in Shadowdark, I think. If you're with me in your BRB, jump yourself to page 91 and you'll see a page cleverly titled Downtime. And on that page, you will see on the left and the right, carousing or learning. It says at the top, between adventures, you can choose to undertake one downtime activity. So for carousing, on the following page, you will find there is a handy dandy table where you can spend some money, go out, have yourself a revelry, roll a die, and see what happens to your character. That's pretty fun. Maybe it's gambling. Maybe you meet somebody. Maybe somebody meets you. Maybe you get beat up. Maybe you just, find ill-gotten gains and new enemies. all the good things that happen in role playing. Now, learning is the other option. You can engage in learning. You work with the GM to set up, hey, what is it your character wants to learn? The book gives you a few examples, like an auxiliary skill. A new language is one that it calls out. You're going to make an extreme intelligence check. And if you succeed, you pick up the new skill. If you fail, well, you didn't pick it up this time, but next downtime, you could roll again, try again, but the DC drops down a step. So it would go down to hard, a 15. And once you succeed, you've picked it up. There's your two options. That's kind of it. After that, we go on to Wizards and Thieves and actual real-time gambling. And that's kind of what Shadow Dark has for us. There's, of course, more nuance and detail, as is often the case with Shadow Dark's prose. But that's sort of it. And how long is it? How much can you get done? What can you do? What if you want to talk to a shopkeeper and you want to learn something? Well, dear DM, that's on you. You got to find an answer. And also, ideally, give your players some structure and some ideas.
Yeah, Jody, I think I want to respond in a couple of ways. I want to first, let's actually tackle carousing, because I know that downtime is kind of we're trying to kind of unpack it as a big, broad thing. But I kind of want to talk about carousing for a couple of reasons, because it comes up a lot of times on the Discord, or I guess the way I'll frame this is a little bit different. I want to talk about carousing because it is the one major gold sink in the book. There's not a whole lot of stuff you can do with gold in the core rule book. And carousing ends up being the way to sink gold into a downtime activity between adventures. So you come back from your adventure, you're loaded down with treasure, you have all this treasure that you get gold for. What are you going to spend it on? And carousing is kind of the primary way that the rule book suggests you might do that. Now, I have thoughts about this that I'm sure we'll get into, and I'm sure you do as well. But because carousing is the way that you spend your gold, it becomes a focus of conversation about the game. So what I want to ask you, Jody, is as far as the carousing rules in the book, first of all, what have we changed for the most part? I think we've made this a couple of significant changes. And what are your thoughts about the carousing aspect of downtime as it appears in the core rules? Just like where are you at in terms of what have you changed, and maybe why, and how does that relate to your thoughts about how it works?
Well, first and foremost, we changed the gold values to reflect the fact that we're using a different XP system. This isn't our Sunday open table dungeon delving groups that they're going to dungeons, they're coming back. This is OD&D at its core idea. Adventurers go to dungeons, get loot, come home. That's it. Full stop. So in those, because we're using gold as XP, like OD&D and older systems like that, we've upped the values to reflect that by just basically tacking a zero onto the end of
PCs are
everything.
getting, on the whole, probably more gold than they might in a more standard Shadow Dark game. And also, I mean, to be honest with you, I think, Jody, you and I started this when we hadn't fully understood the gold piece economy. We hadn't had it laid out by the designer herself.
I was not going to bring it up, but yeah, that and also hadn't really fully grokked the nuances of the interaction between the random treasure tables of SD and how that interacts with XP acquisition, and then how that trickles out to cost of living and the downtime system. Those things are all kind of passively, quietly tied together, as is the way with Shadow Dark. Often there are underlying currents of connectivity and game system that are completely invisible until you sit down and start playing for a while and you go, oh, these things are hanging out together and play off each other. The other necessary change we had to make to the carousing event table for our own sanity of having two GMs share multiple characters and players was anything that specifically referenced you make an enemy or you meet a friend or here's an NPC or anything that was really role play heavy. We had to swap that out because there wasn't going to be any way for Matt and I to consistently adjudicate those things from one table to another. So those were the big changes.
And I'm going to stop you there because the other big change we made was that we no longer allowed players to pool their gold. All of the gold pieces had to come from a single player, and then their roles would come from a single player. And I'm going to just jump in here because I think this is the thing for me that I kind of wanted to throw at you, and I wasn't specific. I wasn't transparent about what I was asking of you. So what I was hoping you would kind of get to was a discussion about specifically this in the rule book. The players pool their gold to meet gold thresholds to give them bonuses to their D8 rolls, but they roll their D8 on the carousing table separately, which means for me, there was always like a narrative breakdown there of, so you're pooling your resources to get a bonus, but then you roll individually, which means you have different experiences carousing. I always felt like there was some narrative dissonance there. Right.
Where are you at? It ends, if you're reading the outcomes section, it ends with saying if the group decides to play out the results of an individual roll, the entire carousing group is usually present for the events. So if you actually then play what is suggested by the carousing event table to like, how did we get here? Everybody's there for that. So it's an individual result, but there's also the elephant in the room with carousing, and I think why it gets so much attention is some of the results result in fact, a lot of them do, you earn XP, and that's huge. That literally your gold spent turns into experience points.
Right.
That you've had these experiences. That's huge. That's frankly, again, in our dungeon delving Sundays where it's just go to the dungeon, get the loot, come home. That's the whole thing is power up your character. Power up your character is XP. So that piece, in terms of it's an individual role, but a group pool of resources, but then you can all play it out. I think what I've missed with carousing as I've worked through it in the past is the fact that it's almost an idea generator. Seems to me how it's supposed to be used, which I didn't really understand. That it's almost implying, hey, here's the things you're going to do in your session based on these carousing rolls. Yes, you could skip them and you could just bloop, you get your XP, you do this, here's what happens. Cool, next, moving on.
And that's kind of what we do on our Sunday games.
Right. And that works fine. And that was the approach I took in the session I was talking about was like, hey, there's this 2-week window because of what's happened in the calendar where you guys need to wait for something to happen out at sea, and then it's going to come in and then you're going to be ready to go. So you just have some time. Let's see what those events are. Whereas Game Master Shame on the Discord mentioned that they had a carousing focused session. So in that instance,
I love that.
Let's roll on the table. What a fun way to go of if it went, I end a session with carousing rolls. Okay, when we get back next time, we're going to play those out. And maybe we'll have some other stuff afterwards. And then I, as a GM, have a week or whatever till between sessions to go, what does this look like? I can do some planning. I know where we're going. Rads, here's what's next. I think in that regard, and I'm going to be real honest here, I have not used carousing that way. But man, that now seems like a real powerful tool.
See, that's how I immediately was like, this is how my GM brain works. In our Dolmenwood game, we play out long, like hours or 2 long sort of downtimes where people are really kind of getting into character and thinking about what they want to get done. And I kind of want to link this now with learning, because from your perspective, I want to hear how this hits your ears, because this is the critique of learning that I hear all the time, as kind of on the Discord channel in particular, is that because carousing gives you experience, players don't do learning. And so I think we can talk about carousing still, but I wanted to get a sense of where are you at in terms of both as a player and as a GM, how you think about the interaction between those two downtime activities, because learning is very nebulous and can I think be leveraged by players to do some really cool things, to do some really characterful things. But I also think that it has the potential to lead to some perverse incentives for players in terms of powering up their characters, and especially because experience from carousing ends up meaningless as you rise through the levels. The experience on those tables is pretty minimal. Where are you at as far as carousing and learning and the way that those two things interact And then, of course, the fact that you could also choose to just allow characters to do something else in their downtime. Where are you at as far as the allure of doing either of those? And I don't want to say GM preference, but like where you are as a GM.
I think I can speak to what I hope are a number of listeners, and would actually be curious to hear if this is a just me and my worldview, or if this is of an age. So downtime as a concept is new to me. This notion of a gamified downtime, that there are mechanical things to be done during downtime specifically. There was no downtime per se in way back in the day of early third ed, or if I take it even further back to my childhood of AD&D, hiring some henchmen was just kind of hand waved of, yeah, you can hire that guy. Okay, moving on. Let's get back to the dungeon. Let's get back to the quest. Let's get back to the adventure.
So you would never play those scenes out?
No. Okay. It was so as a concept, it's a little bit foreign to me, or you would actually play those scenes out, that you were fully role playing those scenes out in conversation, so the gamification of it, where I make a roll, I spend gold, I earn XP, I make allies. That's really new and foreign to me.
Interesting.
If you were of a modern age and you've ever watched Critical Role, one of the things Critical Role both is loved and lambasted for is their shopping episodes, where they play out interactions where, and if I were Matt Mercer and I could do those voices and things like that, hell yeah, I'm doing those scenes. That's outstanding. That's good fun. As a player who gets to play with a GM, Matt, who does do awesome voices and NPCs, I do enjoy those scenes, and I look forward to that. Just play it out.
We don't indulge quite as much as maybe the Critical Role folks do.
No, thank you for clarifying. But I always like to highlight that that's a key difference and a strength of yours.
I appreciate that.
What I see as a GM that's hard with learning is carousing is so quantified in terms of insert gold, make roll, here is specific outcome reward. Learning is, let's talk about it and figure it out and have a narrative around what this means. And have you met that person? It requires a higher lift. I'm going to punch into my my wargaming background here a little bit.
Yeah.
Why in wargaming, tournament play is so much more popular than what is generally referred to as narrative play, which is we've built our armies of space toys or whatever, and we're going to shoot each other up and play our 40K game. And then we're going to tell a story based on what happened on the table, and it's going to be narrative. That's a lot more work than these are my points, those are your points, and who can win.
Right.
It's just more work. Exactly. And I see that dichotomy at play here between carousing and learning. And when players go, okay, well, I want to engage in learning because I'd like my fighter to learn this trip attack so that they can trip people.
Yep.
I want my wizard user to learn this new spell. Man, that really quickly is a slippery slope. And I understand the want because it mechanically gamifies that space. It makes that space concrete, understandable, and measurable. However, it also is a dangerous and difficult slope to proceed on, especially with the I want to make a special kind of attack. I want to make a blinding attack or a special disengage maneuver as a thief, or because now you are having to tack on entirely new rule systems to Shadow Dark that, frankly, the system doesn't really want. It mechanically doesn't want you to do that. So then the question becomes, so what is learning for? What is the mechanical benefit I'm getting from doing this thing? In Dolmenwood, we get clues and we meet people and we talk through those scenes, which has real value.
Yeah, well, okay. So there's two things that you mentioned here. One is the kind of the fighter specifically. I love that we're talking about the fighter again, because I think it's what we didn't get to when we talked about the fighter was this want of players who play fighters to inevitably, what does every single fighter kind of right off the bat want to do? They want to cleave, right? They want to eliminate that one major kind of anchor to that class, which is that they can hit very hard, but they can only hit one thing. And what happens when you're fighting 17 goblins and you're a level 7 fighter and you hit one goblin for like a bazillion hit points, and you feel like in the fantasy, you could just wade through.
Right. God forbid it's 20 kobolds.
Well, let's not even go there.
Sorry, that was easy. Slowing at fruit.
and truly it was. Even a kobold could reach that fruit. But I digress. The thing that I think is it creates some conflict for me, and we've actually been having conversations about this, about how to move forward with learning as we think about revamping the way that we do our kind of Sunday, once a month open table game. Because learning turns into a way for players who understand the mechanics of the game to empower their character in ways that fundamentally make them just better and more effective. Okay? It's like finding a magic item that is perfect for your character, just makes them functionally better than a character with the same exact stats, etc. Right? Maybe it was a random roll, but it doesn't matter. Now your character has an item that just makes them functionally better. It's not bad. It's just something that I think you need to be aware of. And when players are allowed to learn a new, let's use cleave, right? I'll define it. Cleave being if you hit an enemy with an attack, you can spill any extra damage after that enemy is dead. You spill that extra damage over to adjacent enemies, right? And so you could potentially kill multiple enemies in a single attack because you're hitting so hard.
See countless pieces of awesome old or new D&D art of hacking through somebody and guts everywhere, and it's rad.
Yeah,
or zombies.
And I mean, it's like, of course you want to be able to do that. However, the rules of the game suggest that there's an action economy here, and there's reasons that we don't necessarily allow for that. I have found that learning works best, and I don't want to say only works, but I think that you run into far fewer problems when you are playing a narrative, long-form-ish campaign, because you can base learning off of what the characters actually do in the game, and you can make it make sense narratively. I don't know, what is your sense of this? Because I know you have thoughts about it, and I don't want to get too into the weeds, but where are you at on learning and in terms of powering characters up and its relationship to open table and narrative play?
I think for both you and I, in where we're at in our journey of learning and loving Shadow Dark and trying different styles of games again, there's the straight dungeon exploration, and then separately we have our more narrative-based games. You've got your Dolmenwood game where we're using the Shadow Dark rules with that setting. I've been bouncing in and out of this Salt March thing that I'm looking forward to getting back to as soon as possible. I think that's the rub. That's the thing is, because in learning, it literally calls out learning enables you to do new actions or give you advantage on certain checks. That sure sounds like I'm supposed to get a cleave attack there. That's what that sounds like. And I think for me and the style of game I like to run in the world I like to play in and the headcanon I am trying to deliver to my characters, giving them new actions actually undermines the style of the world, that frontier exploration, gritty, dirty, Western made fantasy style game. Dolmenwood is a faction-y world. It's a world of political intrigue. It's a world of strange fey nonsense. That's not about kick booty combo attacks and power moves.
No, it's not.
Could I run a game that is about those things with Shadow Dark? Absolutely. 100% could. Yeah. And learning would be the mechanism by which I would do that. This is
exactly, keep going, because this is exactly where I end up, is that I think that learning plays perfectly into a game that starts with, mud flingers and, mud dwelling.
Yeah. If you want to do Farm Boy Makes Good, you want to tell a Luke Skywalker Arthurian story.
Yeah.
Your vehicle to get from, mud farmer to
that was the word I was looking for. Mud farmer, not mud flinger. What was it doing? What was it doing?
Them both. I thought we were doing Dolmenwood.
Mud divers.
It was Wood Group playing in poo. So that it's how you bridge that gap of getting these super moves and things. And if you have long-standing characters that can do these things, it doesn't matter that they're doing these cool things. And if you're using downtime as a vehicle for wizards to learn new spells out of grimoires and scrolls and things like that, or even priests for that matter, at their temples and their shrines, that's cool stuff because it makes it unique. In Dolmenwood, you've been working on doing some cross-pollination with the actual Dolmenwood spells, which are different significantly than Shadow Dark's spells.
Sure.
And at our table, we've had some characters have the opportunity to learn some of those setting bespoke spells.
Mm-hmm.
Learning is a great vehicle for doing exactly that and getting access to these new and exciting world-specific things. Again, that's all very cool stuff I can totally get excited about. However, that's not the game I want.
I think that learning, what we're kind of dancing around is that learning adds complexity to characters. Like it adds new things to the character sheet. And that to me is always a dangerous, it's a dangerous proposition. Now, I one thing, we couldn't ask Kelsey everything that we wanted to ask her, of course. But one thing I think that it kind of confounds me about learning is that it is the one part of the game that is, it doesn't feel out of place, right? Because of course you want characters to be able to learn stuff, but it very quickly feels out of place tonally when it is happening at the table. Because when you start to give players the opportunity to learn new stuff, to make their class and their character more complex mechanically, you start to blur the lines between the more kind of modern D20 fantasy games that have lots of levers and lots of options on turns, and Shadow Dark, which is designed to keep character classes on a single 2-page spread or sometimes just on a page. And when we talk to Kelsey about class design, and when you read her class design document that we'll repost, the one that she posted on Reddit that we discussed and referenced during our interview, one of the things that I thought was very interesting was her response about, it's very clear when a player designs a class. This is functionally allowing a player to design a part of their class.
Yeah. Because
learning is designed to be within the box of class niches, right? You're not supposed to be able to learn how to backstab, for instance, if you're, a fighter.
Right.
I find it very hard when I don't have narrative grounding. Like this player tried something really cool in battle, or they have a particular relationship with a faction, like you said. I find it really hard when those things that don't kind of ground the character in the world aren't there. They don't ground them in the fiction. I have a really hard time just going like, well, my fighter wants to learn how to cleave, right? Why, right? What other than I want my character to do more damage and be more awesome? What is the purpose of this learning? And if there isn't a larger narrative purpose, which at an open table game, it's hard to draw that out, right? That's not really why we're there. We're there to just kind of roll dice, have some fun, solve some problems, be in the dungeon, yada, yada, yada. And nominally, I mean, we don't say this out loud, but the purpose of the game really is to have characters just get more powerful, be able to kill and deal with, kill more powerful monsters and deal with more difficult challenges, right? That's the point.
Right.
Well, then shouldn't learning get you there? And why does then it feel tonally different, right? Like that's kind of what I'm struggling with.
Well, and it's because that brings into my ear the dynamic of a power curve, right? That there's an assumed everybody's having fun. The thing in that conversation with Kelsey that she said is, are you the only person who's going to be having fun at the table with this class or with this ability?
Yeah.
And one of the things we've run into is just, okay, you want to learn this new cool cleave ability or whatever.
Right. That's just kind of the stand-in because it's easy.
Why would you not do that every single turn? Right. That's now your default attack mode. And it's all these slippery slopes. Yes, there's a little bit of a straw man here in that there are definitely answers that aren't this, that there are nuanced ways to handle these things, that there are,
yeah.
And everybody can figure those things out. One of the things I'm hearing of this kind of cognitive dissonance with this learning this thing and why do you want to learn this thing? And has something happened in the game? There's also the time aspect of in-game time that is so critical with this discussion around learning and downtime, which is, it gets made fun of, and it's an old, as D&D has existed, time problem of, so these characters went from 1st to 8th, 9th, 10th level And in game time, the character's time, like a week passed or two, maybe if we're getting real exciting, a month. And they went from level 2 to like level 9, and the power difference is exponential. And maybe this rings really false for you and I because we are intimately hands-on with people learning every day and how long it takes to really make meaningful growth and learn a thing. And that doesn't happen quickly. That is even for the most astute of people, there's a long time involved in a learning. It's actually part of the learning mechanics in the game that I like, is that the DC starts at 18. It is a time investment. Again, another reason most of the time people just default to carousing, because I make one roll and I get something as opposed to I get nothing.
Let me ask you this. How long is when you think of downtime, what is your first thought in terms of how long it is?
I think this is a little bit of a loaded question because we've used it this long so much. It's a week. Yeah. It's about a week. It's about a week of time off. There's actually a lot of factors that play into that. There's some old D&D recovery rules that fit in there of to why is it a week. But it's about a week of time off. And that's funny. I'm glad you asked, because I was circling the drain to get to this. We've had to talk about this in our Dolmenwood game of it was a very strict week off.
Yeah, in fact, I changed the downtime rules to just be downtime costs a week because I didn't want to have that annoying problem of you guys. It's been 2 months. We've been playing for 2 years, and suddenly, everyone looks back at the calendar and it doesn't feel right.
Right. One of the things I've slowly been trying to adopt is just a seasonal mindset, if not a keeping days on a calendar. What season of the year is it? And then moving through seasons. And then when winter comes around, the players probably aren't doing much. So you can just have a 6-month time jump. It's a fun GME trick that allows for creating this.
I'm sorry. I have to pause. 6 months of winter?
Why not? Dude, I'm in dream mode right now. I'm so tired of the sunshine. There's the most Californian sentence you're going to hear in a hot minute.
Dude, I might edit that because the degree to which your California bias is showing, while everyone else is like laboring under no delusions about cold and weather, you're sitting here. We had like a couple days of early March, late February sun, and you're complaining.
I'm so... Bring the rain, dude. Sorry.
You need to move on.
So, okay. A few months of cold and winter. So they have an extended downtime, and just the calendar time passes. The point being, downtime has to be a meaningful time investment. It can't just be, we went to town, okay, high five, everybody's good, and we turned around and went back, and it's an hour or two, or it does have that cognitive dissonance problem of, even some of the carousing results really suggest, some specifically call out an extended amount of time, and some of them suggest it would take more than a minute for this to happen. There's a whole caper where you've gone on a heist and it went wrong, but then it worked out. But then that did not happen in one drunken evening, even in my college days,
Well, so look, I feel very strongly about this too. I agree with you. I have changed, however, how long downtime, quote unquote, has to be in our Dolmenwood game, because I was finding that the week was just, it was too rigid, and it was creating kind of perverse incentives that I didn't really like, such as it would create like strange time differentials in an odd, or not differentials, but strange timing of, no one would really have anything that would need to take a week. And,
some players would, some wouldn't. And then
I just didn't really like how
you've also added it. I just want to throw this in here. And that I actually really like in a narrative game. Let me stress that this is a heavy narrative story driven game, and player centric and world centric and all that stuff, that we only level up during downtime.
Yes,
which I actually really, really like. So sorry if
you just scooped me, but like that was what I wanted to say, was that the thing that I think I will always continue to do is that I will require downtime to level up. I will allow multiple levels during, like if you accrue tons of experience and you make it back to town, great, you level up multiple times. However, the reason that I like this is because it lends itself to privileging downtime in a way that just allowing learning or carousing doesn't. Because downtime to me needs to have a couple of things. It needs to have an investment in game. It also needs to have an investment like not out of game, but like in real world time. I think that in order for downtime to be meaningful, I don't know that you need to play out the scenes, like you need to role play the scenes in depth or anything like that. But I think that it can't just be spend some gold, roll some dice, and then go back to the dungeon for me personally. And I think for some tables it probably could be. But then it does just turn into a generation of XP or a generation of abilities. Like it just becomes a purely mechanical thing that you go through the steps of. And I don't know that really gives the fantasy, like the kind of sword and sorcery, go out, get your riches, come back, drink and party and spend all your riches and then realize you're broke and then have to go back and, like that's kind of the fantasy that's being developed here, especially at low levels. I don't know. I just don't think that necessarily works when there's these purely mechanical things happening. And for me, it's one of the reasons that I like the downtime system. I like the fact that there's only two options. I like the fact that I have the privilege and ability, per the core rules to do whatever the hell I want. I am not a fan necessarily of making into mechanics things that would otherwise be potentially better left to me as a GM to kind of adjudicate as in terms of like role playing. Like I would like for there to be learning just to me feels a little bit too mechanical without enough guardrails to creating to causing problems. I don't know. I'm sort of spinning out here because this is like one of the only places that I find consistent friction in the rules, because I don't want to tell players no when they come up with cool ideas, but I also don't. I know that players will inevitably try and do things that will, make the game less fun ultimately and less challenging.
Well, we haven't seen over 2 years with, well over 20 plus people cycling through the table for the two of us. We haven't seen any other evidence yet of people using learning or downtime for a purely narrative effect. And
to be fair, we haven't necessarily given them a reason to.
Exactly.
Largely because of the structure of, and I'm maybe I'm not, but I think the reason, I don't want to belabor this anymore, but I think the reason that I'm kind of getting exercised about this is because the way that Shadow Dark presents itself, now we know that this isn't necessarily the only way you can use the system because we're not doing that. We're using the system for other things, but the way that it presents itself is as the gameplay loop is go to the dungeon, get riches, get XP for finding cool stuff and doing cool stuff and being cool and awesome. Come back, spend your money on carousing and potentially learning, and then go back to the dungeon. Like that is the gameplay loop that is described in Shadow Dark. It's described in the fiction, right? Of the short fiction sections in many ways. That's also kind of the way that we adjudicate our Sunday sessions, except for the fact that there's just a lack of narrative for players to kind of ground themselves in. But I don't know. I don't know that if we infused the game with more narrative, that would solve the problem.
I don't think so. And again, there's a disconnect just between carousing and learning. Of carousing's hyper mechanical and learning is nebulous.
Yeah.
That's a good thing in like so much of Shadow Dark, that it gives you that permission structure to play in these two different lanes to make the system do what you want it to do. Now, I mentioned earlier that my experience with this notion of downtime is pretty new. This idea of codifying your time off from adventuring. In my olden days, it was literally you need this much gold because the tavern keeper is going to charge you this much, and therefore,
yeah.
And you want to hire a hireling if that's what you're into, or you want to buy a horse. So you are more versed in this, though, Matt. You are a connoisseur of systems in a way that I am not as much. So you were telling me before we started recording that like, oh no, this system does it and this system does it and this system does it. The one at the front that I am aware of that I have not played and would really love to, Blades in the Dark, to my understanding, is downtime. The game's downtime about you talking about what you did between downtimes or something. Like,
yeah,
that might be a terrible explanation or a really good explanation of you go on a caper, but then like things were already in play on the caper. See good caper movies.
It's very clear you haven't played before, but
yeah. Thank you.
But frankly, I have not run a session of Blades that I would love to. But what I want to say is you had said something to the effect of like, well, how many systems really are there that have downtime mechanics, like specific mechanics, and called on the rulebook? And I was thinking about it, and I thought of a few titles, and it is clear to me though that codifying downtime in a mechanical way, and I'm going to say this, and then somebody's going to give me lots of examples.
Well, actually,
and that's fine. Like, at least in terms of the popularity of games of this ilk, I can't really think of any classic games. Like, I don't think that Traveler had a downtime mechanic built into the original Traveler rules. I don't think, certainly, D&D, somewhere in the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, there has to be something about downtime, but it's probably so obtuse and overwritten that it doesn't really make any sense. In BX there was the ability for fighters, or human fighters, to make strongholds,
right?
Which that's not downtime mechanics. It's just you can build a really big building.
It was the point of the game once upon a once is that's what you do, is you're working towards retirement, which actually I love and would love to see some systems that are more about your working towards your retirement. Where's your exit strategy from this terrible lifestyle you've adopted? But
a lot of new systems have codified it. So, Blades in the Dark has a robust downtime, and you're correct, Jody, in some way that Blades in the Dark is a lot about telling a very particular kind of story where downtime and the space between capers or heists is really important, and you are doing a lot to tell a story that is kind of soup to nuts. Both the planning, the actual heist itself, and then the aftermath. And a lot of that aftermath is what happens to your base and what happens to you as a party and as an organization. And there's lots of factional relationships and stuff. Another game that has a kind of downtime that I have been interacting with a lot lately is Mothership, which has shore leave built in. And I love the way that Mothership does it, because the way that you learn new skills in Mothership is this unconscionably long timeline where you literally, in order to do it, you would need in a campaign, you would need to either have every person in the party basically take years off in order to learn new skills individually, and have an unbelievably large amount of money for some of these, especially for higher level skills. Or you just fully put your character, you literally go, okay, that character is in school now, and we'll get back to them in a few years. Which, is, I think if I had played as much Mothership as I have played Shadowdark, I would have problems with that as well, because the timeline is just, it's so realistic, but it's also so unreasonable, right? I don't know. To me, downtime is, and this is probably because of the kind of game master I am, I think of downtime as an opportunity to express character. There shouldn't be, in my view, and I want you to respond to this, there should not, in my opinion, be any chance of characters dying during downtime. Now, I say that with an asterisk, because of course a player can make a really stupid decision and we could potentially get into it. But all things equal, right? If the player doesn't make any decisions, they just want to go to talk to the shopkeeper, or they just want to learn how to swing their sword better, they're not going to die. What do you think about that kind of, I don't know. There's a very definitive statement.
I think that rings pretty true. Again, players going to be players and figure out ways to do ridiculous, wonderful things. Yeah. And that's when we put on our player hats.
The player asterisk.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that Shadowdark's rule specifically has a call out to the time passes mechanic. And a concept that was kind of drilled into me in my early GMing and playing days was the notion of the comic book storytelling method, which is things happen between panels. We don't tell story between panels, but there is story happening between panels. So you see a moment, and then you see another moment, and you see another moment, and we might jump way ahead in time, and the story is moving forward, but that little gap in between the two pictures, nothing so essential happened there that we need to really talk about it. You can just assume through it. And I think downtime lives between the panels is an assumption, unless you're playing it out at the table. So to that degree, yeah, a character dying between panels and we cut back to the action, by the way, Bob's dead, and moving forward would be wildly unsatisfying. For the player, might be actually really good for the game. Who knows? Bob might have been a jerk. I think initially I make light, but I think, yeah, this just shouldn't be a spot where major story beats are happening. And that's part of the problem, is that time passes and then we move on.
I disagree about the story beats thing, because for me, in my like kind of dramatic storytelling brain, I think downtime offers an exceptional opportunity to have major story beats, because players can take huge swings or have really interesting character development moments, which I realize in the kind of pantheon of OSR kind of stuff is not necessarily seen, is often not seen in the greatest light. But for instance, we have had in our Dolmenwood game some really wonderful moments that have occurred during downtime. Moments of character expression, people, having, I don't want to say like backstory reveals, but I think like we learned things about characters that maybe no one, including the player, knew prior to this downtime moment. And we only were able to have those moments because they were given room to breathe at the table, and we spent time and energy and creativity on them. But also because the players sort of understood that unless they did something really dumb, that they were going to be safe for that week. And they could take a big swing. They could say, my character's going to open this tome of forbidden magic and read it and see what they get out of it, right? And it's this wonderful moment, and it's going to affect, and it's super important to what happens after downtime closes, right? Their character might be irrevocably changed, but they're not going to die, and they can take this big swing, and they can use their downtime. And I didn't realize I cared this much about this.
Yeah, this is a sweet spot for you.
Man, I also think that that every single player's downtime should matter, right? And the thing that they do should have weight to it. And that's the other reason I don't like the roll a d20, make an intelligence check. Did you pass? No. Okay, wait until your next downtime. And then you don't get to do anything. I just think that downtime, because to me, it offers such a wonderful moment between adventures, I think that it should matter.
I have two reactions to that. I'm jumping in. I'm dropping in here. We got to, okay, two things. One, my bias as a GM, I glossed over so hard earlier that I didn't even notice it till you started explaining all this out.
Sorry, Jody. I'm not explaining. I think I'm lecturing at this point.
Okay. It's all right. We have microphones and a soapbox, and hopefully people enjoy it and are having strong reactions, or like, yeah, Matt, keep going.
This is aggressive. This is what we call aggressive editing.
So when I was earlier saying what I was saying about between the panels, I actually agree with everything you were rebuttal of. No, characters should have these meaningful moments during downtime if we're going to play that out. I actually agree with that. My bias is always, what is the plot? What's the beginning, middle, and end of what we're trying to do? I get unreasonably nervous about getting my adventure into, I don't know where they're going or what they're doing or what's going on with them as a party, because if our next session could be our last, I would at least like to have the chance to wrap things up for them, that these characters don't just fade off into the nothingness of the page and time because the BBEG of scheduling ate them. Like that there was an arc and we were trying to do a thing and there was incentive to finish. So when I said that important plot beats should happen, I'm exclusively talking about those big session arc, not individual character arcs. And I think when it comes to downtime, individual character arcs are wonderful. It's an amazing opportunity to explore that space. I think to jump back to Game Master Shame's topic that they gave us, they're looking for more ways to make sure that everybody has some time in the spotlight and they keep up that pacing. And this is a thing early on when we first started playing together. I don't mean to call you out, but you struggled with. That was hard for you. You have since moved well beyond those early struggles. But that notion of, I want to use this downtime, and now we're talking about using downtime for just character development. We're playing in a narrative space, and we want this world narrative. We want our characters to develop and grow. We want them to develop personalities and live in the world. And I think even in an OSR game, there's an element of this, that there's a lot of time and space for this to happen.
Sure.
You go to the dungeon, you come home, you go to the dungeon, you come home. But home has meaning and value, and the village of Hamlet has a bar keep and a tavern keep. And I want to get to know those people, and I want to know why they have a ruby under their floorboards, allegedly. So how do you make that time for the characters, character development, party development meaningful, and maybe serve that plot? But first, let's just talk about that part of Game Master Shame's question of make sure everybody has some spotlight time. Do you have any specific tools that you're aware of from your early days? You would kind of go one long cutscene with one person. And I mean, literally, I can remember times where it was like 30 minutes of you and one person playing. And then we would move on and around the table. And hey,
totally.
Sometimes that's necessary. I don't want to overdo this of like, never do that, because sometimes everybody in the table, I remember moments where you were doing something and you were like, and then you cut to me and you're like, all right. And your character, I'm like, no, my character does nothing. Get back to them. We are all invested in what Bob is doing over there. Nobody wants to do anything until we find out if Nicodemus reads the book of unholy spiritual death. That's important. Let's find out about that first. Let's give characters spotlights, which you're really great at now, but keeping pacing balanced. What have you learned over the years?
Well, what I have learned is
you're learning.
What have I learned? Well, eventually
18.
Eventually I had enough downtimes that I just learned it. The long and short of it is that there is a sweet spot. And as far as pacing is concerned, what I try and do is find, and this is going to be either very helpful or completely unhelpful. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of in between, because it's very much a sort of idiosyncratic to me. I'll do a couple of things. First of all, I do not allow any more than one thing per downtime to get done. One major thing. And I'm pretty strict about that. Now, if characters want to like go like buy stuff or whatever, they can do that. But I completely hand wave that. I am not going to spend any time on a scene or indulging in a character moment unless it is their one thing they want to focus on, because then I know it matters. So that's number one. Number two is if I can couple players together, I'll do it, right? So if multiple players are going to carouse, then we're going to play that scene out with those characters specifically, and I'll couple them together and try and kind of efficiently get through it that way. The third thing is, if I have a scene that I know is going to take a while, I will figure out where it needs to be. Does it need to be up front so that it informs the rest of the table about what they're going to do with their downtime, or is it going to be dramatic and then I want it to be last? Last thing, sometimes I will cut a lot of stuff short at the table, and then I will either write in my post-session email a scene, or I will come back and then at the beginning of the next session, I'll have a larger extended moment or some kind of pre-prepared thing. I think I love your idea of having everyone tell you what they want to do with their downtime at the end of the session. That is just never happened for me. It just never seems to work out. But those are kind of, as far as pacing is concerned, my goal is always to keep things short and punchy. And if I have to make up a character, have them introduce themselves doing the funny voice, and then get into third person. This is where I do take advantage of a lot of like third person kind of perspective. I think we talked about this previously on the show, that I like staying in character, and I like extemporaneously speaking in character. It's something that I enjoy doing. However, what I think is useful in downtime is to, present the character, get that good moment, get that, that scene established, and then go into third person and then try and push out of that scene as quickly as you can. I think downtime scenes need some time to breathe, but they also are the ones that you can get into and get out of quickly, and I don't think anyone's going to be super bummed about that.
I think that last part is ringing so true for me. If you can get into them and get out of them quickly, and nobody's going to be bummed. It's the getting out of them quickly that I struggle with. To move around, I'm going to add on to all of the things you just said. Some, I'll agree with you. Some of those were idiosyncratic to you, and I think some of those are just genuinely like really good advice of the one thing.
We're not going to tell you which.
Well, the one I want to highlight is the one thing and what do you want to achieve? In a sense, downtime is no different than any other type of play.
Right.
Player, what are you trying to achieve? Bob Worldbuilder just did an amazing video about getting to the point and what do you want to achieve? Not a format that works for Matt and I, but something to work on as GMs. So what do you want to work on? And then to shadow darkify downtime a little bit, if I may, because I'm realizing these are things I've adopted both by being a player at your table now over the years, but also in really trying now to continue to dig down deeper and deeper into the shadow dark tome and really embrace it on its own merits and find the interplay between me and what I want and need from my system and my table and my group and what Shadow Dark's offering me. The always on initiative metric. You take turns going around the table. Neither you or I stick to that much at all. We try. And in a dungeon delving sense, we do. During downtime, less so, but
sure.
Try. Sure. Little gold star for effort situation. I have found that my beat to make this a real concrete, so how do I keep pacing up in that scene? So what do you want to do? I want to go to this tavern. Okay, here's what the tavern's like. Now that you're there, what do you want to achieve? I'm looking for so-and-so. Okay, you see these three people. That might be them. Which one do you want to approach? And the player goes, cool. I'm going to come back to you. Think on that. Next person. Get to a decision point and then go, I'm going to come back to you. This is also a teacher skill. They train us to give think time. That if you had the traumatic experience of being a little kid in class and going, 5 times 7, Billy, what's the answer? And you, and you got cold called and you didn't know how to answer. That's a lousy feeling. It feels bad. So what you do is you go think time. I'm telling you the question I'm going to present you. I'm going to move on. I will come back and answer that question. This does mean as a GM, you need to develop the skill of remembering what the hell you asked people and working around the table. That metric of going, or that system of going, get you to a decision point in this thing you want to achieve during downtime and move on to the next person, and use kind of always on initiative working around the table to talk about things. In terms of specifically giving spotlight and maintaining pace, I have found that to be really satisfying. The danger, and I led with this, is I will get stuck in that loop and not call an end to it because it's fun and I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
and then like, oh yeah, we need to get back to moving the big story, comic book story panels forward,
sure.
Not these between the panels. Really important and enjoyable and frankly self-indulgent for both GM and player if it's me times. So I don't know. I tried to put a point on any of that. I don't know how any of that landed for you, but those are actually meaningful steps about downtime and these just characterful campfire moments.
All right. That is a great place to wrap things up. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to hear from our sponsor. We're going to come back and wrap up the show. This episode of Dungeon Master Diaries is brought to you by Well Met Fresh, because if you're going to die in a dungeon, you might as well do it on a full stomach. Look, these folks get it. They know you've been living off hardtack, questionable mushrooms, and whatever meat you could scavenge off that thing that you swear was at one point a boar. But let's be honest, how long before starvation sets in, or worse, food poisoning? With Well Met Fresh, you get pre-packaged ration kits designed for adventurers who don't have time to forage, butcher, or barter with the denizens of the dungeon for like a half-eaten and rotten onion. Their meals are balanced to keep you on your feet in the depths of the Shadow Dark. That's right, No more passing out from hunger when you are crawling around in the caves of chaos. Savor dishes like spiced carrion beetle stew, grilled cave eel, or their specialty, mystery meat jerky, sourced from only the finest unidentified creatures. And unlike those ration packs, I mean, you know the ones that I'm talking about that taste like old leather, well-met fresh meals are crafted by actual chefs who are between jobs at the local tavern. Now, if you want to sign up, you can use code I'm Hungry to get 20% off your first 3 kits because, trust me, you don't want your last meal to be stale bread and regret. Well met fresh. Eat well, die later. All right, Jody, let us bring this topic into the light and talk about our core takeaways from this discussion. You go first. What do you got?
All right. I'm going to jump over and talk to players for a moment. Players, if you happen to be one. I realize that might be weird because this is DM Diaries and you're a player, but nevertheless, if you're a GM, maybe encourage them. Point being, use downtime to build your character. These are scenes that you can really leverage as a player to get something meaningful out of, and GMs encourage your players to do just that. And I'm going to say, take it one step further. Try to bring others into your story. I think players too often develop their characters in a really singular kind of vacuum. You're part of a party. Bring the other party members into that story and let them work together and grow. And GMs, if you can leverage that, man, do so. It's just a really rich and fruitful time to get to that fun, talk about our feelings moments that doesn't feel weirdly forced in the middle of a dungeon while bugbears are breathing down your neck.
All right, my first one is a little bit in response to perhaps I've had some think time. There's some response to what you were saying right before the break there. And that is, I just want to add one thing that you can do to maybe help with the pacing of your downtime, which is potentially rolling the dice first, which actually happens with the carousing roll, but you can do that with a lot of different rolls, whether or not you're using the carousing learning or otherwise. If there's a roll associated, or even if there's not, have the player roll a stat check and just see to what degree they might succeed and then play the scene out. Because at that point, everyone kind of knows how the scene's going to go. Did you succeed? Did you fail? Well, if we're going to play out a scene of failure, then cool. Maybe there's a fun moment in there that you can just kind of highlight and move on. So sometimes it's fun to roll the dice and then play the scene out, knowing what the result is going to be.
Total safe space to do that. My closeout is about that idea of story and pacing and all of those ideas that downtime is both wonderful and just the bane of. As a game master, how much does downtime matter to you? How important is that time and space? And it doesn't have to be an all the time answer. Sometimes it's different from session to session. But how important is that downtime? And then, you are the meter of pace and you can control that. If it's not an important moment, man, clip, get through it. If it is a real important moment, well, then live it, give it that breathing space at your table it needs.
All right, my second and final core takeaway is that you cannot have a meaningful campaign if strict time records are not... Oh, sorry. I'm reading from the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide again. My apologies. But I want to just say that we were just talking about story pace and the classic Gygax quote of you cannot have a meaningful campaign if strict time records are not kept. There is a little grain of truth in there, as so many people have pointed out, that figuring out, and we started this conversation talking about your kind of amorphous, that like 2-week period. What are people doing? What would have helped me, Jody, and what we talked about afterwards, and kind of the core impetus for why we're here talking about this, is that I just needed a little bit more structure, a little bit more strict time record in terms of how long things were taking, what I could and couldn't do during that 2-week downtime period. And I think keeping that in the back of your mind while adjudicating downtime can be super helpful.
As the torchlight grows dim, we hope you were able to find something useful in our discussion today that you can take into a future game. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, like we did today, head over to the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadow Dark Discord channel. Look for any links to any materials we referenced in this episode in that thread or in the show notes. And if you'd like to reach out to us directly, you can find Jody on the Shadow Dark Facebook page under the handle Pezman, and you can message Matt via Discord using the handle SC Matt. Until next time, just relax, man.
Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster. Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production, is not associated with the Arcane Library LLC. Shattered Arc RPG is a product of the Arcane Library. Copyright 2023.